18. Lair, Tolliver, and LOreal Faulk. In June 2023, a 29-year-old Houston woman named LOreal Faulk was murdered inside her apartment. According to police, Faulk was shot at least once during the early evening on the day of her murder. An unknown man was initially identified as the suspected shooter, but he was released without charges before detectives narrowed their focus on 25-year-old Lair Tolliver, who they believe was fighting with the victim over a man. At the time, Tolliver was already being held on suspicion of breaking into Faulk's apartment and tampering with her phone. 3 months after the shooting, she was hit with an additional charge of murder. According to the man who reported his suspicions about the murder to police, Tolliver was using Faulk's phone after the shooting. He claimed that Tolliver said Faulk was shot by a man known only as Twin. Several of the victims' relatives reportedly told investigators that they believed Tolliver was directly involved in Faulk's murder. They believe that Twin was actually the man that Tolliver and Faulk were competing over, and that Tolliver killed Faulk after discovering text messages between the woman and Twin. As of December 2023, Tolliver remains behind bars on suspicion of tampering with evidence, burglary, murder, and an out-of-state fugitive warrant. 17. Partially clothed Vegas Brawl. On what began as a typical summer evening in Las Vegas in July of 2023, a fight broke out between 4 scantily clad women at the 5-star Wynn Hotel. The half-naked, hair-pulling brawl allegedly stemmed from a fight over a married man. A crowd of onlookers quickly gathered, and bystander footage of the catfight quickly went viral. According to a police report, the married man's angry wife attacked the alleged mistress, 29-year-old Amanda Collado, and Collado's friend, 24-year-old Danielle Pertusiello. In the video of the fight, Pertusiello could be seen bearing nearly everything as her skirt rode up while wrestling on the floor. Pertusiello and Collado reportedly claimed that they were attending a rooftop party when their unnamed attacker ambushed them near the bathrooms. In their own words, one of the women said that someone hit them from behind with closed fists in the back of the head. Danielle, the mistress, immediately recognized her attacker, according to the police report. She reportedly told police that her lover's wife had caught him cheating. The fistfight eventually spilled over onto the casino games. Security eventually stepped in and separated the parties. Pertusiello and Collado were charged with disorderly conduct, while the married man's wife cleared out of her hotel room and vanished seemingly into thin air, most likely in a bid to avoid further police contact. 16. Jenner Gerardo and Meredith Chapman. Mark Gerardo began cheating on his wife Jenner in 2017 after starting a new job at the University of Delaware. It was there that he met his mistress, 33-year-old Meredith Chapman, who worked as an official at the university. Mark had grown unhappy in his marriage, and Chapman was in the midst of a divorce when sparks flew between the clandestine pair, eventually leading to a full-blown affair. 47-year-old Jenner eventually began to suspect that Mark was cheating on her. Determined to find out for sure, she sewed listening devices into the pockets of his clothing, installed a tracking device on his car, and tapped his phone. In the meantime, she said that Mark attended couples therapy, but it did little, if anything, to alleviate their marital problems. Armed with the information she picked up from her various surveillance devices, Jenner eventually confronted Mark about her suspicions that he was cheating, and he admitted to the affair. The Gerardos separated, but Jenner found it impossible to move on. While waiting for her one night at a restaurant for a planned meeting to discuss their impending divorce, Mark received a handful of text messages from Jenner stating that he had ruined her life and that she hoped he would never find happiness. The messages also contained what Jenner claimed to be a final goodbye. While the concerning correspondence came from Jenner, it caused Mark to worry first and foremost about his mistress's well-being. He tried contacting Chapman, but he couldn't reach her, so he rushed over to her house, where he encountered a horror scene. In a true case of, if I can't have you, nobody can, both Jenner and Meredith were dead from gunshot wounds. Investigators concluded that Jenner had broken into Meredith's house, waited for her to come home, and shot her without warning. In a 2020 interview nearly a year and a half later, Mark said that he had found himself wanting out of the 24-year marriage after he and Jenner fell into yet another of many ruts that they had experienced before. Unfortunately, she just wasn't willing to let go, and as a result, 2 women needlessly lost their lives. 15. Jean Ann James and Gladys Wakabayashi. In 1992, Jean Ann James discovered that her husband Derek was having an affair with her friend, 40-year-old Gladys Wakabayashi. She then decided that the best way to outdo her competition was to eliminate it. After spending a few days thinking and planning, Jean called up Gladys and said that she was coming by with a gift. To avoid having her vehicle connected with what she was about to do, Jean parked several blocks away from Gladys's home in Vancouver, British Columbia, then walked the rest of the way. When she arrived at Gladys's door, she presented her friend with a necklace and offered to put it on for her. After securing the clasp, Jean reached around and cut Gladys's throat with a box cutter. When the victim's body was discovered later that day, detectives suspected Jean of being the killer, but they lacked enough evidence to connect her to the crime. Derek and Jean Ann James stayed together, and years passed without any major developments in the case. In 2007, 15 years after the murder, police posed as gangsters and befriended Jean at a spa in what she thought was a chance encounter. Over the next 11 months, they led her to believe that they were members of a criminal organization and that they wanted her to work for them. In what's known in Canada as a Mr. Big sting, Jean was led to believe that she had to meet with the gang's boss and confess to past misdeeds to remain in good standing with the organization. During the meeting, she gave a detailed description of the gruesome crime, which she had never admitted to anyone else. It was enough to finally charge her with murder. The defense argued that Jean's confession was coerced and slammed the Mr. Big tactic as manipulative, but the court found the evidence compelling enough to convict her of first-degree murder in 2011. At the age of 72, she headed to prison to serve out a life sentence. In 2015, a court denied her petition for private visits with her husband, deeming her an unmanageable risk to his safety. A report detailing the decision cites past allegations of domestic violence, as well as suspicions that James tampered with fellow inmates' food and tried to order contract killings against several fellow prisoners. 14. Clara Harris and Gail Bridges. Clara Suarez became a dentist during the 1980s after immigrating to the United States from Colombia. In 1992, she married a successful orthodontist named David Harris. The couple went into business together and ran a chain of popular dental offices, which afforded them a well-to-do lifestyle. By the time the Harrises became parents to twin boys 6 years into the marriage, Clara had formed a close bond with David's daughter from a previous marriage, and the future continued to look bright. But the couple's seemingly picture-perfect life fell apart in 2002, when one of their employees told Clara that David was having an affair with his secretary, Gail Bridges. Upon being confronted by his devastated wife, David confessed to the affair. He told Clara that he would end it if she made certain changes to her appearance and dedicated more time to him and their household. She quit her job, started putting more effort into her looks, and catered to David both at the dinner table and in bed. When Clara began to suspect that David had failed to stop seeing Gail as promised, she hired a private investigator to confirm her suspicions. She soon received a call that David was with his mistress at the same hotel where he and Clara had gotten married 10 years earlier. Clara drove to the hotel with her 16-year-old stepdaughter and viciously confronted David and Gail in the lobby. She slapped Gail and ripped her shirt off while her stepdaughter hit her father and told him she hated him. Instead of trying to explain himself to his family, David showed more concern for Gail and protectively walked her out into the parking lot. Blinded by rage, Harris got behind the wheel and crashed her car into David. She backed up over him and allegedly ran him over 2 more times, killing him at the scene and landing herself a murder charge. During the trial, Clara's lawyers claimed that she had acted under sudden passion and that she only ran over David once, while prosecutors argued that the victim's death was both premeditated and deliberate. The jury convicted Clara of murder, but agreed that the defense's sudden passion argument, which carries a lesser penalty. She was sentenced to 20 years and was released on parole in 2018 after serving 15 years. 13. Elena Romanova and Maria Sokolova. When Elena Romanova discovered her husband Evgeny's affair with Maria Sokolova in 2014, she flew into an uncontrolled fit of rage. The Russian bombshell learned about the tryst when Sokolova posted a photo of some flowers Evgeny had bought for her for Valentine's Day on social media. Elena had received an identical batch of roses, and she knew that Maria worked with her husband at an airport. Elena confronted Maria and learned that Evgeny had taken her on romantic trips to Paris and other cities while pretending that he was traveling for work. The secret relationship had been going on for 5 years, and Sokolova allegedly threatened to rip Elena's entire family away from her. Shortly after the heated discussion, Elena showed up at a local police station and confessed to murdering her husband's lover. Elena told investigators that she forced Sokolova into her car at knife point. She then tied a scarf around the woman's neck and tightened it to the car seat, hoping that she'd slowly suffocate during the half-hour drive to a remote wooded area outside St. Petersburg. When she removed Sokolova from the car, Elena realized her victim was still alive. So she set her on fire and then stabbed and mutilated her. The scorned wife later claimed that she was in a severe state of distress and didn't remember committing the crime. She was charged with conspiring with others to kidnap and murder. Evgeny quickly vanished after Maria's death. He was absent at her funeral and also never visited Elena in jail. At the time of his wife's trial in 2019, it was believed that he had shacked up with a new woman. Elena faced up to 20 years if convicted, but it's unclear how the case played out. In a strange twist, Elena's mother, who was also her defense attorney, claimed that her daughter was innocent and that police had set her up. 12. Kaye Reid. British charity worker Kaye Reid was crushed when she lost a job she really enjoyed in 2016. She was also angry because she suspected her boss, Robert Page, of having something to do with her getting fired. The two had been involved in a steamy fling, which allegedly continued after Page got married. After being fired, Reid posted a nude photo of her former boss on his wife's Facebook page and was arrested for it. Reid's lawyer later described how Page became a shoulder for the young woman to cry on when she split from a previous boyfriend. The two reportedly continued to talk and fooled around on at least one occasion after Page and his wife exchanged their vows. The defense argued that Reid felt taken advantage of and humiliated, and that she posted the photo because she was trying to be heard. In her own words, she said she wanted to prove the affair to Page's wife. She pleaded guilty to the revenge porn charge. It could have landed her in prison for 2 years, but the judge handed down a 6-month conditional discharge, citing Page's provocative behavior as a mitigating factor. 11. Lauren Gray and Amanda Boylan. After finding out that her husband had cheated on her with a local single mom in 2018, 38-year-old Lauren Gray tracked the other woman down in the Scottish town of Paisley and confronted her. The other woman, Amanda Boylan, could hear Gray shouting from behind that she wanted a word with her. Boylan initially ignored the scorned wife, but the two women ended up exchanging words, and it eventually escalated to physical blows. Gray allegedly took the first hit by punching Boylan in the face. She then grabbed Boylan by the hair, then got into the car and drove away, leaving the victim on the sidewalk with a bloody nose. Police found Gray at her home and arrested her for assault. Her lawyer argued that it was the first time his client had come face-to-face with his husband's mistress, and that the attack wasn't planned. Emotions were high, and Gray spontaneously lost control, which is understandable on some level, but it's also illegal to physically attack people. Her attorney apologized on her behalf at court, and said that she and her husband were working on their issues in hopes of saving their marriage. Gray pleaded guilty and was ordered to pay a several $100 fine. 10. Shauna Nelson and Heather Garaus. Ignacio Garaus began cheating on his wife Heather in 2004, more than 10 years into their marriage. At first, it was easy to keep the affair a secret. The Greeley, Colorado police officer often worked overnights, and his married mistress, Shauna Nelson, was a 911 dispatcher at his workplace, making it easy for the couple to slip away unnoticed by their families. Garaus mistakenly believed that Nelson, who was married to a local sheriff's deputy, wanted a strictly physical fling, so he assumed that she would never have a reason or desire to interfere with his marriage. Little did he know, Nelson had a reputation for her frequent extramarital affairs and for wanting to keep her paramours all to herself. In 2005, Shauna became pregnant with Ignacio's baby. Her husband, Ken, knew that the baby wasn't his, but he wanted to save the marriage and willingly became a father to the child. In the meantime, Shauna pressured Garaus to continue seeing her by threatening to tell Heather about their relationship if he denied her. She also started routinely stalking and harassing Heather in public. Ignacio grew tired of feeling trapped in the affair, so he took away Shauna's ammo by coming clean to Heather in 2006. Heather agreed to work on the marriage as long as he ended things for good with Shauna. He kept his word and also signed away his rights to his 6-month-old son. Not long after that, a masked assailant approached Heather in her work parking lot and commanded her at gunpoint to get on her knees before firing 2 bullets into her head. Suspicion immediately turned towards Nelson, who was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison. She claims to this day that she was framed. 9. Lisa Brown and Sandra Barnett. Former Buffalo Bills tight end Buster Barnett probably never expected to make any major headlines again after his 4-season career with the team ended in 1984. But his name reappeared in the news more than 30 years later in 2015, when his former mistress kidnapped his wife. On the morning of July 15th, 46-year-old Lisa Brown showed up at Barnett's workplace in Clayton County, Georgia, jealous and upset that he planned to take a trip to Las Vegas with his wife, 50-year-old Sandra Barnett. She then went to the couple's home and kidnapped Sandra, who was on the phone with her close friend Ruby Chester when she answered the door. Chester later told the Associated Press that she could hear the visitor threatening to kill Sandra if she didn't open the door. Sandra didn't know who it was, but suspected that the woman was Buster's former mistress. She had endured years of harassment from Brown after finding out about the affair and fighting to save her marriage, according to Chester. After failing to reach the correct police department, Chester called a mutual friend and asked him to check on Sandra. He saw a suspicious vehicle in the driveway and wrote the plate number down, then pulled over on a nearby street corner and called 911. Before police arrived, the SUV sped past. Law enforcement issued a statewide advisory to be on the lookout for Brown's vehicle, which was spotted the next morning in western Georgia. Brown pulled over after a brief chase, but before police could approach, she fatally shot Sandra and then took her own life. 8. Ashley Spencer and the other woman. Deputies at the Brevard County Sheriff's Office in Florida received an alarming report in 2020 when someone told them that a woman was trying to hire a hitman to kill her husband's mistress. 33-year-old Ashley Spencer had approached the person and asked if they knew any felons who would do a certain job for her. When the individual asked for more details, Spencer allegedly said that she wanted someone to kill her husband's mistress and her child. Spencer's husband and his secret lover met while working together as corrections officers. They began an affair, and the mistress got pregnant and gave birth to the man's baby. It came as an enormous blow to Spencer, who had tried unsuccessfully to conceive a child with her husband. The person who reported the situation to law enforcement claimed that Spencer had talked about buying a gun and using it on the baby. Authorities took the situation extremely seriously. In a bid to collect enough incriminating evidence to arrest Spencer, They had the person she had asked for help connect her with an undercover federal agent posing as a hitman. Spencer allegedly told the undercover that she wanted them to break into the other woman's home and tie her up so that she could cause harm to her and anyone else inside, including the baby. She offered $2,000 and the use of her gun, and wanted the job done before her birthday as a gift to herself, according to an arrest affidavit. In the meantime, Spencer plotted to make it look like she was out of town during the murder in hopes that it would pass as an alibi. She planned to leave her car at the relative's home, borrow their car to commit the crime, and to wear gloves to avoid getting gunpowder on her hands. Authorities charged her with solicitation to commit first-degree murder and solicitation to commit occupied burglary with battery. 7. Sarah Parker and Shelina Kyle. Deputies in Calcasieu Parish, Louisiana, received an unusual call in 2018 from a tipster who claimed that a woman was driving around with a dead body in her trunk. The suspect in question was 22-year-old Sarah Parker, who was dating a married Army soldier named Logan Kyle. They were both in the car when law enforcement pulled them over, along with Parker's 2 young children. Inside the trunk was the body of Kyle's pregnant wife, Shelina. Their marriage had been rocky for quite some time, and they had even separated at one point, which was when Kyle met Parker. But they had recently decided to try making their marriage work, and as far as Shelina knew, Kyle had ended his relationship with Parker. Authorities believed that Kyle killed Shelina, and that he and Parker were looking for somewhere to dispose of the victim's body. Sources close to the case told the Daily Mail that Kyle was unhappy with Shelina because he liked to cross-dress, and she disapproved of it. She even reportedly threatened to tell her husband's commanders about her husband's secret, which allegedly ran deeper than being just a hobby. According to one source, Kyle was considering getting gender reassignment surgery once he left the military. Shelina refused to accept this part of her husband's life, but Parker was supposedly fine with it. Kyle was convicted of murder and received a life sentence. Parker was charged with obstruction of justice, failing to report a homicide, and 2 counts of contributing to the delinquency of a minor. The outcome of her case is unclear, but if convicted of all the charges, she faces up to 40 years of hard labor in the Louisiana state prison system. 6. Katie Belflower, Jenna Nanetti, and Aspen Lum. Jenna Nanetti and 20-year-old Mike Simmons married in 2002 after a months-long whirlwind romance. The young couple lived at Jenna's grandmother's home in San Joaquin County, California, while saving up for their own place. But Mike cheated with Jenna's former classmate, Katie Belflower. The marriage fell apart within months, and the pair separated without having found a home of their own. Mike moved in with Belflower, while Jenna remained at her grandmother's house. Jenna vanished later that year. After going out one night, she left her grandmother a voicemail saying that someone had attacked her and she was in danger. She never came home, and her car was found engulfed in flames outside a bar. A fisherman discovered Jenna's body in a remote area with 2 gunshot wounds to the chest. But investigators had little to go on, and the case stalled until the following year when a local deputy saw Katie Belflower and her friend, Jeff Hamilton, crouched over a young woman outside in the middle of the night. Katie and Jeff were wearing latex gloves and were huddled around their friend, Aspen Lum's head. They claimed that they were just worried that Lum was going to vomit on them and that they wanted to keep their hands clean. Aspen initially went along with the story, but later told law enforcement that Katie and Jeff were trying to choke her to death when the deputy pulled up. She also said that Katie had apologized profusely for trying to kill her and begged her not to report it, which was exactly what she did as soon as she got away from her attackers. Jeff admitted that Katie had asked him to help kill Aspen, whom she had come to see as a growing threat to her relationship with Mike. Jeff also implicated himself, Katie, and Mike in Jenna's death, telling deputies that Mike lured her over to his house to talk. Katie struck her with a 2x4 from behind, and Mike pretended to be angry at her for it. He comforted Jenna, then drove her to a remote area where Katie and Jeff were waiting. The 3 suspects were charged with murder. Katie took a plea deal and was sentenced to 25 years to life. Jeff pleaded guilty in exchange for a 15-year sentence, and Simmons was sentenced to life plus 25 years. Katie gave birth to his baby in prison a few months later, and the child was adopted. 5. Jealousy in West Java. In a shocking case that made news headlines across Indonesia, a 26-year-old woman from West Java named Neneng Umaya landed herself in prison thanks to her violent reaction to her husband's infidelity. Upon discovering intimate text messages between her husband and the other woman in 2022, a 26-year-old janitor named Dini Nurdiani, Neneng was shocked to find that her husband had told Dini that he planned to divorce his wife so they could get married. She warned Dini to end things and stay away, but the affair continued. Pushed to her breaking point, Neneng sent Dini a text message from a fake number, pretending to be a relative of her husband's who was interested in meeting his new partner. They made plans to meet at a bus stop, where Neneng approached Dini from behind, struck her repeatedly with a blunt object, and then stabbed her to death. She disposed of the victim's body along a riverbank. After discovering the crime, investigators went to the home Neneng shared with her husband to see if he knew anything about his mistress's disappearance. Neneng reportedly seemed uneasy and ended up confessing to the murder. Under Indonesian law, she faces a minimum of 20 years behind bars for her crime and could receive the death penalty. She expressed remorse for her actions and seemed ready to accept whatever consequences may come. 4. Anarie Anastasi. Anarie Anastasi and her husband Anthony decided to spice up their marriage in 2015 by taking on a shared partner. They began a steamy three-way relationship with 25-year-old Jacqueline Riggs. And when things got serious, the Anastasis invited Riggs to move into their Maryland home so they could live happily ever after as a throuple. Not surprisingly, it wasn't long before things got complicated. As these arrangements often do, Anthony and Jacqueline became an exclusive couple and kicked Anne out of the relationship. She began sleeping alone in the bedroom she once shared with her husband, while he spent his nights in the basement with Riggs. Desperate to rid herself of the problem, Anne Anastasi persuaded her daughter's 18-year-old boyfriend, Gabriel Struss, to kill her husband and his mistress. Eager to please his girlfriend's mother, Struss shot Anthony in the head and stabbed Jacqueline to death. Anne dialed 911 several hours later and reported in a seemingly frantic tone that her husband had harmed himself. When officers arrived, she added details to make it sound like David had also killed Riggs. It didn't take long for police to realize that she was hiding something, and they found gunpowder on her clothes and body. A gun that had been left next to Anthony's body turned out to be different from the weapon that was used to kill him, pointing toward a very sloppy attempt at staging an obvious murder as a suicide. Authorities charged Anastasi and Struss with 2 counts of first-degree murder and several other crimes related to the murders, holding Anne accountable as the mastermind, even if she didn't physically carry out the act. Struss pleaded guilty and received a 60-year sentence. In the meantime, Anne's attorney argued that she was driven to arrange the murders after suffering decades of emotional and financial abuse by her husband, and asked the judge to take these circumstances into consideration when deciding her sentence. The judge acknowledged that the abuse Anne endured could be seen as mitigating factors in her husband's death, but that it was clear that the murder was premeditated rather than an instantaneous emotional response to harm. Anne took an Alford plea, which means that she maintains her innocence, but admits that the prosecution likely has enough evidence to secure a conviction against her. She was sentenced to 60 years in prison. 3. Rachel Wade and Sarah Lubin. A young Florida man named Josh Camacho got more than he bargained for in 2009 when he started dating 2 women at the same time. He already had a past with 18-year-old Rachel Wade and was still seeing her on and off when he started dating 18-year-old Sarah Lubin. The 2 women eventually found out about each other, and a heated months-long rivalry ensued. They exchanged vile text messages, harassed one another online, exchanged threatening phone calls, and even swapped harsh words in public. The escalating tensions between the parties reached a fever pitch in early 2010 when Rachel showed up at Camacho's house while Lubin was there. Later that night, Sarah decided it was time to finally settle the score once and for all. She drove to a mutual friend's home in Pinellas Park, where Wade was hanging out, and while there are conflicting versions of what happened when she arrived, the encounter undeniably turned violent. It ended with Wade stabbing Lubin in the shoulder and chest, puncturing her heart. She died from her injuries. Police charged Wade with murder. She argued in court that Lubin had charged at her with her fists flying, and that she stabbed the young woman in self-defense. But witnesses told a much different story, claiming that Wade attacked Lubin before she even had a chance to exit her vehicle. When the stabbing was over, she allegedly tossed the knife into a neighbor's yard and calmly walked away. Wade was convicted of second-degree murder and received a 27-year prison sentence. 2. Shannon O'Rourke Griffin and Irina Puskariu. Former NASA trainer Shannon O'Rourke Griffin and her husband, retired Army Colonel Roscoe Griffin, were undergoing couples therapy for their marital problems in 2012 when Roscoe decided that their issues were beyond help and that he wanted a divorce. O'Rourke had recently learned that her husband was having an affair, but he refused to stop seeing his mistress, a psychiatrist named Irina Puskariu. Unwilling to accept the reality that her marriage was over, O'Rourke drove 250 miles, or 400 kilometers, from her Kansas home to Puskariu's house in Missouri and knocked on the door. She allegedly wore an adult diaper so she wouldn't have to stop to use the restroom and made the drive without stopping. The 52-year-old then entered and shot Puskariu 3 times right in front of her elderly mother. After killing her victim, O'Rourke called her daughter and her estranged husband to let them know that she had done what was necessary to protect people from Puskariu, whom she described as an evil woman. When Roscoe tried to call his mistress and couldn't reach her, he contacted the police. O'Rourke was driving home when authorities caught up with her in Wichita. She admitted to having 2 handguns in the car and was taken into custody on suspicion of murder. She was ultimately convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 20 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 14 years. And now for number 1. But if you want to hear more bizarre and crazy stories, stay tuned after the video for some more content. 1. Emma Taylor and Crystal Sanchez. In 2008, Emma Taylor caught her husband cheating red-handed with a pregnant woman in the couple's Shreveport, Louisiana home. A neighbor later identified the other woman as an alleged prostitute named Crystal Sanchez, who was 5 months along in her pregnancy at the time. It's unclear whether Taylor's husband is the baby's father. Witnesses told local station KSLA that they saw Sanchez flee the home in an attempt to outrun Taylor, who chased after the mistress with her SUV. She was later accused of striking Sanchez with the vehicle and then getting out and trying to fight her. Police intervened in time to stop things from getting deadly and charged Taylor with second-degree attempted murder. Sanchez declined medical attention at the scene. Neighbors had mixed reactions to the ordeal. One nearby resident told KSLA that she would have taken her anger out on the husband rather than the mistress. Another local resident said they would have probably done the same thing as Taylor if she were in the woman's shoes, except the victim probably wouldn't have made it.
9. Jod Herring. Vermont prosecutor Scott Williams was at a gym in downtown Bar one day in 2015 when he heard gunshots. He ran outside where he saw a colleague on the ground with a gunshot wound and a woman standing nearby with a hunting rifle in her hand. Williams tackled the shooter and took her gun, then comforted social worker Lara Sobel during her dying moments. The killer, 40-year-old Jod Herring, had recently lost custody of her daughter. She blamed Sobel, who worked for the county's Department for Children and Families, and wanted revenge. After killing her aunt and 2 cousins, whom she believed reported her to the DCF, Herring went to the office building where Sobel worked and waited for her to leave for the day. While being taken into custody, Herring was disturbingly calm, making small talk and laughing about what she'd just done as if it were a normal, everyday activity. Her adult daughter, Desiree, told news outlet VT Digger that her mother had a long history in family court, including the removal of 2 of her daughters from the home. She was also disgruntled when her granddaughter was taken away from Desiree, who condemned her mother's actions but said that she could understand why Herring disliked the people at Children's Services and eventually snapped. Herring pleaded guilty to 4 counts of murder and was sentenced to life in prison. But the conclusion of the case did little to heal the lasting emotional scars of those affected by the crimes, including Williams, who resigned from his position as a state attorney to deal with post-traumatic stress. 8. Dorothy Lee Barnett. Dorothy Lee Barnett lost custody of her infant daughter Savannah in 1994 over her wealthy, estranged husband's claims that she abused him during their marriage. She would later claim that her husband, Benjamin Harris Todd III, was the abuser, and she would use it as her reason for fleeing South Carolina with their 11-month-old during a supervised visit. Barnett's disappearance was meticulously planned. She changed her appearance, obtained fake identity documents for her and Savannah, and set aside enough money to start a new life. An international manhunt ensued, but law enforcement failed to catch up with Dorothy and Savannah, who spent time in Germany, France, Malaysia, Singapore, South Africa, and Botswana before ultimately ending up in Australia. Along the way, Dorothy remarried and changed her and Savannah's name for a second time. During her nearly 20 years on the run, authorities depicted her as bitter, mentally ill, and possibly dangerous, the same way Harris Todd had described her in family court. She was finally captured in 2013 while living in Queensland, where she was well liked among her neighbors. Dorothy was deported to the US and served 21 months in prison for her crimes. Savannah, who's now an adult, stood by her mother. She told the press that Dorothy was a great mother who gave her a stable upbringing, contrary to the demonizing way she was described during her custody battle with Todd. Now that she's done with her time, Dorothy wants to return to Australia where Savannah lives, but the country has refused to allow her to move back. 7. Jorge Morales II. Janet Concepcion was alarmed when her little boy Jojo told her in 2021 that his father planned to take him away to a farm and that he hoped she would join them. But she continued to honor her court-ordered visitation agreement with the boy's father, 45-year-old Jorge Morales II, and things continued as usual for the next year. Concepcion's worst nightmare came true in August of 2022, when Jojo disappeared from Miami with Morales and his mother, 68-year-old Lilian Pena Morales. An Amber Alert was issued for the little boy, who was captured in surveillance footage at a Walgreens in Maine 2 days later. The suspects ditched the SUV they were traveling in near the Canadian border and have not been spotted since. Investigators believe that Morales spent months planning his son's kidnapping and that they're hiding out somewhere in eastern Canada. According to the last update, they may be in New Brunswick. Both the FBI and the US Marshals are searching for the fugitives and the little boy, who reportedly has medical needs. A $10,000 reward is being offered for information leading to Jojo's safe return. 6. Stephanie Russell. Stephanie Russell lost custody of her kids in 2020 for making false abuse allegations against her ex-husband in court and was relegated to supervised visits. The 52-year-old pediatrician from Louisville, Kentucky, decided that the best way to deal with the problem was to eliminate her ex from the equation. She found someone who said they were willing to kill her ex for a fee and agreed to pay $7,000 to get the job done. To show that she was serious, she left the first half in a Dropbox outside her office with plans to pay the second half once the victim was dead. But the hitman was actually an FBI agent, and in 2022 Russell was federally charged for the murder-for-hire plot. Attorney John Harrelson, who represented Russell's ex-husband in the divorce and custody dispute, told local station WLKY that the experience was like constantly swinging at balls in a tennis match. He said that the battle involved a lot of frivolous motions and meetings with Louisville's Crimes Against Children's unit. If convicted, Russell faces up to 10 years in prison with no possibility of early parole. 5. David Barnes. A Texas man named David Barnes was faced with a nightmarish mess when his ex-wife Svetlana Koptyeva violated a court-ordered custody agreement and fled to Russia with their 2 children in 2019. He traveled to Russia in early 2022 in hopes of seeing his kids and maybe even bringing them back to the US, but was detained in Moscow on allegations of abusing his kids years earlier. Koptyeva had made similar accusations against Barnes during their lengthy divorce and custody battle in the US, but came out on the losing end of it when investigators found no evidence to back up the claims. She's now wanted on a felony charge of interfering with child custody while Barnes languishes in a Russian jail. David's sister, Carol Barnes, told ABC News that her brother was never out for revenge against his ex-wife, and that he wanted both himself and Koptyeva to have an active and present role in the kids' lives. But Svetlana allegedly did everything in her power to keep the children from him, even when doing so meant breaking the law and leaving the country. As diplomatic tensions between the US and Russia grow increasingly tense amid the ongoing war in Ukraine, a negotiation between the two countries for Barnes' release seems unlikely. For now, he remains in Moscow's Detention Center 5, which is known for its deplorable conditions. Former Marine Trevor Reed, who was held there in 2019 for allegedly assaulting 2 police officers, described the jail as being rat-infested and extremely dirty in an ABC interview. By the time he was released, his weight had dropped dangerously low from malnutrition and he was coughing up blood. The Barnes family, along with David's friends and employer, have appeared on national news in hopes that high-ranking government officials will hear their pleas and do everything possible to get him released. 4. Chris Williams. After getting married, Chris Williams and her wife Rebecca Wilson decided they wanted a child. Wilson carried the baby, but Williams was equally involved in their son's life, making her no less of a parent than Wilson. But a court didn't see it that way, when the now estranged couple went through a nasty split that saw them fighting over the little boy's custody. At a hearing in 2022, a judge ruled that because Williams had not adopted the child, she was not his legal parent. By then, the boy was 2 years old. She had been in his life consistently since day one, and he knew her as one of his 2 mothers. Williams was nevertheless removed from her son's birth certificate, and the judge ordered for the sperm donor that the woman used to be listed as the father. To complicate matters even more, the sperm donor decided that he wanted to be involved in the child's life and became a third contender in the already complicated fight. Williams made it clear that she planned to continue fighting for her parental rights, and as the case gained airplay, the Oklahoma ACLU announced its plans to step in and help if the case escalated to the state's appellate court. Thankfully, the judge reversed her decision and ordered for Williams to be reinstated on her son's birth certificate. While it marks a step toward reuniting her with her son, she still faces an uphill battle and is unable to have contact with her son as long as a 5-year protective order that Wilson has against her remains in place. 3. Neilbia. A 46-year-old lawyer from Fairfield, Connecticut already faced a mounting pile of personal and legal issues when he refused to let his 2 kids and a mediator leave his house at the end of a supervised visit one day in 2022. Neilbia eventually let them go, and when the cop showed up at his house, he claimed not to remember what happened and smelled of booze, according to police. He posted bond and was due in court the next day for a previous charge of violating a restraining order, but failed to show up. When police arrived at Batia's home to arrest him for skipping court, he barricaded himself inside. Officers soon began to smell natural gas and promptly evacuated the neighborhood. A SWAT negotiator tried persuading Batia to at least talk to him from a window, but he refused, and the team forced him out by spraying a chemical agent into the house. At his arraignment, the prosecutor urged the judge to set a high bail. Attorney Eugene Riccio, who represented Batia's ex-wife, said that his client and her child had endured years of trauma and argued that Batia is a danger to both his family and the community. He faces a slew of charges, including at least 12 domestic violence-related counts, some of which are from before the more recent incidents that landed him back in police custody. Court records show that Batia was entangled in a lengthy divorce and custody battle that had dragged on for more than 5 years. Bail was set at $2 million, and he was still in custody, according to the last update. 2. Ted Hudiko. In 2019, Ted Hudiko's wife told him that she was leaving him and that their teenage son now identified as transgender. Unwilling to put the matter on hold and discuss it at a time when Ted wasn't caught up in a work project, she abruptly left their home in the San Francisco Bay Area with the couple's 2 kids. In an effort to better understand what his child was going through and vowing to keep an open mind, he researched gender dysphoria and the transitioning process. He was concerned about the possible effects of puberty blockers and estrogen, and wanted the teen to avoid medically transitioning until they were sure it was what they wanted. In court, the judge asked Ted if he thinks being transgender is a sin. He answered no, but was stripped of all his parental rights, yet was allowed to continue seeing his other son. He completely lost contact with his transitioning child, who's now 18 and free to make their own medical decisions. Speaking with the press in early 2022, Ted said that the two hadn't spoken in 3 years despite his attempts to reconnect. He's accepted that the kid he once knew as his son is now his daughter, and said that he hopes they can someday rebuild their relationship. 1. Carly Morris. When Carly Morris ended her marriage to her daughter's father, he returned to Saudi Arabia, where he was originally from, and left their little girl Tala with Carly in the United States. In 2019, he asked Carly to bring their daughter, who was then 5 years old, for a visit. She agreed, but things went terribly wrong a week into their visit, when her ex asked for her and Tala's travel documents so he could process their exit visa. Carly handed the documents over, but never got them back. She would later learn that her ex was using the documents to transfer Tala's citizenship to Saudi Arabia, where dual citizenship is not recognized. This effectively gave Tala's father sole custody and made Carly powerless to take her back to the US without his permission. The next thing she knew, she was spending each day alone in a windowless hotel room with no internet access, while her ex picked Tala up in the morning and returned her late at night. 2 years passed before Carly began reaching out to US politicians and diplomats for help. She finally won custody of Tala, but no decision-making power over major aspects of the girl's life. Carly is also banned from leaving Riyadh as she faces a criminal charge for speaking out about her struggle. The prosecution is seeking prison time, and the conviction could come with a death sentence. According to the Human Rights Foundation, around 50 American women who have children with Saudi nationals are fighting to get their kids out of the country. A battle that many women from Canada, the United Kingdom, and other Western countries are also currently facing.
Thanks for watching. If you got along with your neighbor but weren't close, and their partner was having suspicious visitors during the day, would you tell the person or would you stay out of it? Why or why not? Let us know in the comments below, and remember to subscribe. See you soon. Bye.